The dim hum of the station's life support systems echoed through the corridors of Epsilon Outpost, a skeletal relic orbiting the gas giant Zorith. Captain Lyra Voss gripped the railing as another tremor rattled the deck, her clawed fingers digging into the worn metal. A veteran of the Krellian fleet, her scales bore scars from skirmishes long forgotten now that the humans had left. Beside her, Engineer Turok muttered curses in the low rumble of his native tongue, his multifaceted eyes scanning the flickering console. "Power grids failing again," he said, his voice gravelly with frustration. "Without those human-designed stabilizers, we're drifting toward the storms." Lyra nodded, her tail flicking irritably. The humans had built this place decades ago, back when their alliance ships dotted every system, patching together the galaxy's fragile peace with their endless ingenuity. Then, without warning, they packed up their fleets and vanished into their home sector, citing some internal crisis no one else understood. The galaxy had laughed at first, fragile primates running home. But now, 5 cycles later, the cracks were showing. Outposts like this one, reliant on human tech no one else could maintain, were the first to falter. A klaxon blared from the bridge, sharp and insistent. Lyra pushed off the railing, her boots clanging against the grated floor as she hurried forward. Turok lumbered after her, toolkit clanking at his belt. In the command center, Navigator Soren hunched over the holographic display, his elongated neck craning as he traced the incoming data streams. Soren was the cautious one, always double-checking trajectories, his mind a web of probabilities. "Captain," he said without looking up, "the orbital decay's accelerating. If we don't boost thrusters in the next hour, we'll skim Zoritha's upper atmosphere. The heat shields won't hold," Lyra finished, sliding into her chair. The viewport stretched before her, framing the swirling amber bands of the gas giant, storms churning like living beasts below. She tapped the controls, pulling up the thruster diagnostics. Red warnings pulsed across the screen. Auxiliary power offline, main relays corroded from disuse. Human relays, of course, self-repairing circuits that no Krellian engineer had replicated. Turok leaned in, his breath hot against her shoulder. "I can reroute the emergency cells, but it'll burn them out. No backups after that." "Do it," Lyra ordered, her voice steady despite the knot in her gut. This wasn't just about survival. Epsilon was a relay point for supply convoys from the core worlds. If it fell, entire sectors would starve, trade routes collapse. The Vexery cartels were already probing the edges, their raider ships slipping through the voids left by human patrols. One outpost down, and the dominoes would tumble. Turok's manipulators flew over the panel, sparks flying as he bypassed safeties. The station groaned, a deep vibration rumbling through the hull. Soren's console beeped urgently. "Incoming transmission, Vexery signature. They're hailing us." Lyra's spines bristled. Of all the timing. She opened the channel, the view screen crackling to life with the snarling visage of Commander Drask, his tusks gleaming under the harsh lights of his bridge. "Voss," he growled, eyes narrowing. "Your little tin can's looking vulnerable. Power us up for a refuel, or we'll take what we need from the wreckage." The threat hung in the air, but Lyra saw the hunger in his gaze, the desperation. The Vexery were scavengers, thriving on the chaos of humanity's exit, but even they were stretched thin without stable ports. She leaned forward, forcing calm into her tone. "Drask, we're as crippled as you are. Join us or watch us both burn." He barked a laugh, but the line cut abruptly. Soren glanced at her, feathers ruffling. "He'll come for us. The storms are masking his approach." Lyra stood, mind racing. The thrusters would buy time, but not enough. They needed a fix, something clever, something human-like in its audacity. Turok wiped grease from his brow. The old human manuals in the archives might have a workaround for the relays. "Find it," she said. "Soren, plot an evasion vector. We're not dying out here because the galaxy forgot how to hold itself together." As the station shuddered again, the first wisps of Zoritha's atmosphere began to glow against the hull, a faint orange haze promising fire. Kale gripped the console's edge as the alarm's wail cut through the dim bridge of the Vesper. The ship's hull groaned under the strain of the nebula's electromagnetic fury, lights flickering like dying stars. Beside him, Lyra scanned the readouts, her tentacles twitching with frustration. "Shields at 40%, she muttered, her voice a low hiss over the din, If we don't reroute power soon, we'll fry every circuit from here to the core. Torin, the burly engineer from the outer rings, lumbered in from the access tunnel, wiping grease from his scaled arms. He was the cautious one, always double-checking seals before a jump, but now his eyes burned with urgency. Auxiliaries are holding, but the plasma vents are clogging with ionized dust. One more surge and we're venting atmosphere. He slammed a panel shut, sparks dancing at his touch. Kale nodded, his mind racing through options they drilled 100 times in Sims. Back when human advisors still ran those drills. Divert from life support. Non-essentials first. It was a gamble. The air would grow stale faster, but better that than explosive decompression. Lyra's fingers flew across her station, rerouting flows with practiced efficiency. She was the witty core of their trio, quick with a quip to cut tension, but today her focus was ironclad. Done. Shields climbing, to 52. That's it, Captain. We're dancing on the edge. The nebula outside churned, a swirling maelstrom of violet and crimson that had claimed countless vessels before humanity's exodus. Back then, human ingenuity had mapped these voids, their probes and algorithms turning chaos into navigable paths. Now, with the Alliance fleet stretched thin across a galaxy unraveling at the seams, ships like the Vesper ran blind. Kale remembered the old stories, humans who jury-rigged failing drives mid-storm, turning scrap into salvation. But they were gone, vanished into their wormhole arc a decade ago, leaving behind a void no one knew how to fill. A deeper rumble shook the deck and Torin's voice cracked over the comm, incoming pulse, brace. The ship bucked, console sparking as energy lashed the hull. Kale braced against the inertial dampener's whine, tasting blood from a bitten lip. Lyra cursed in the old trade tongue, her station's hollow flickering erratically. Navigation's glitching. We're off course by 3 degrees, straight into the heart of it. Torin burst back onto the bridge, hauling a makeshift conduit patched with salvaged alloy. I can bypass the main relay, but it'll take manual overrides. Someone's got to crawl the Jeffries tube while this thing shakes apart. His gaze flicked to Kale, then Lyra. No one volunteered. The tubes were a death trap in turbulence, walls closing like jaws. Kale unstrapped first, grabbing a toolkit from the wall. I'll do it. Keep her steady. Lyra's eyes widened, a rare crack in her composure. Captain, that's suicide. Let me, but he was already moving, clipping a harness to the hatch. You're better on nav, Torin, cover engineering. We adapt or we die out here. It was the human way, or so the archives said, grit over glory, one step into the dark. The tube swallowed him whole, a narrow vein pulsing with the ship's frantic heartbeat. Alarms blared muffled through the grating, and the air grew thick with ozone. Kale wedged the conduit in place, fingers numb as he twisted wires by feel, sparks singeing his scales. Outside, the nebula's glow seeped through viewports, a beautiful predator indifferent to their struggle. A jolt nearly tore him free. He clung tighter, whispering calculations from memory, human formulas, etched into every Alliance manual. On the bridge, Lyra coaxed the shields higher, her voice steady as she called out vectors. Pulse in 10, 9. Torin monitored from below, rerouting what power he could, sweat beading on his brow. The gamble paid off with a shuddering whine, the bypass held. Kale emerged coughing, face smeared with char, but the readout stabilized. Shields at 70. They were through the worst. As the Vesper limped clear, the nebula receding like a fading bruise, Kale slumped into his chair. Status. Lyra exhaled, a ghost of her usual smirk returning. We're alive. Barely. But comms are down, could be hours to ping the relay. Torin grunted approval, patching a hull breach. Good work, Cap. Humans would have loved this mess. Kale stared at the starfield ahead, dotted with the ghosts of abandoned outposts. The galaxy felt emptier without them, it seems fraying under pressures no one had foreseen. One nebula down, but the real storm brewed in the silence of their absence. A resource drought crippling trade lanes, rival factions probing weakened borders. Their mission to the core world suddenly seemed smaller, a thread in a tapestry coming undone. Kaler gripped the console edge, his tendrils quivering as the ship's alarms wailed in staccato bursts. The viewport framed the swirling nebula like a predator's maw, its ionized gases clawing at the hull with invisible fury. Beside him, Myra's multifaceted eyes flickered with calculations, her exoskeleton humming faintly as she rerouted power. "The stabilizers are holding, for now," she said, voice steady but laced with the strain of forced calm. "But if we push the engines any harder, we'll tear a breach." Zenth, the youngest of their trio, paced the cramped bridge, his frilled neck pulsing with agitation. He was the cautious one, always double-checking protocols, but today that trait bordered on paralysis. "We should have waited for the fleet's reinforcements. This nebula wasn't on the departure charts, humanity's logs must have missed it." His words hung heavy, a reminder of the void left by those who had vanished 6 cycles ago. The humans, with their boundless ingenuity, had mapped these stars, built the networks that kept the coalition alive. Now, without them, every shadow hid a threat. Kaler silenced the nearest alarm with a sharp tap, his mind racing through contingencies. The external challenge was clear. A rogue plasma storm born from the nebula's unstable core had crippled their navigation array mid-jump. They were adrift light years from the nearest relay, with failing life support as the icing on the disaster. The stakes bit deep: lose this scout vessel, and the coalition's expansion into the outer rim stalled, dooming colonies to isolation. "No time for regrets," Kaler replied, his tone earnest, pulling them back to the moment. "Mira, what's our window before the storm peaks?" She extrapolated on her holographic display, lines of data weaving like fragile threads. 90 minutes. If we can jury-rig the auxiliary thrusters with the cargo bay's grav plates, we might slingshot clear. It was a human-inspired hack, one of the few tricks they'd salvaged from archived manuals. Mira had always admired their grit, the way they'd turned scraps into salvation. But admiration was in action. Zenth halted his pacing, frills flaring. "And if it backfires? The grav plates aren't rated for plasma interference. We'd destabilize the core." His caution sparked an argument, voices overlapping in the confined space. Natural, heated, born of pressure rather than pettiness. Kaler raised a tendril for silence, his brave resolve shining through as he met their gazes. "We adapt or we die out here. Like they warned us before leaving." Humanity's departure hadn't been malice. It was exhaustion, a quiet exodus after centuries of propping up a galaxy too dependent. The coalition had laughed then, certain in their superiority. Now the joke echoed in the alarms. They moved as one, Zenth hauling tools while Mira initiated the bypass. Kaler manned the manual overrides, sweat beading on his scales. The ship groaned as power surged, the nebula's glow painting the bridge in erratic crimson. For a heartbeat, it worked. The thrusters fired in uneven bursts, nudging them toward the storm's edge. Then, catastrophe. A feedback loop ignited, sparks erupting from the console like vengeful stars. Mira yelped, yanking her limb back from a live wire. "It's cascading, the grav plates are resonating with the plasma." Zenth dove to isolate the circuit, but too late. The ship bucked violently, inertial dampeners failing in a whirl of nausea. Kaler braced against the bulkhead, watching readouts plummet. Life support dipped to critical, oxygen recyclers sputtering. The plan had backfired spectacularly, stranding them deeper in the nebula's grasp. Zenth slumped, frills limp. "What now? We're blind." Mira, ever the witty survivor amid ruin, forced a grim chuckle. "Now we think like them, improvise with what we've got left." But her eyes betrayed the fear. Without human cleverness, their ingenuity felt like grasping at voids. The storm howled on, indifferent to their plight, a tangible reminder that the galaxy's undoing had only just begun. Kaler gripped the console edge as the shuttle shuddered through the nebula's fringes, violet tendrils of gas curling like smoke from a dying fire. The pilot, a wiry vexary named Lyra, muttered curses in her native tongue, her tentacles twitching over the controls. Beside him sat Mira, the expedition's xenobiologist, her furred ears flattened against the rising hum of the engines. They were the last of the joint survey team, 3 survivors from a crew of 12, chasing echoes of humanity's abandoned outposts. The nebula wasn't just a pretty veil, it was a graveyard of derelict probes, human relics scattered like forgotten toys. Their mission? Salvage what tech they could to combat the void storm ravaging the core worlds. But the storm fed on energy signatures, twisting them into rifts that swallowed ships whole. Humans had tamed worse in their time here, or so the archives claimed, before they vanished overnight, engines silent, no farewells. Proximity alert, Lyra snapped, her voice cutting the tension. That outpost's beacon is flickering, intermittent. Could be interference, or it's already compromised. Kaler nodded, his scaled fingers tracing the holographic map. He was the cautious one, always calculating odds, while Mira chased curiosities with reckless zeal. Hold course. If it's human-grade shielding, it might give us a window against the storm's edge. The shuttle dipped, engines whining as they pierced the denser clouds. Outside, a single image burned. A colossal human station half buried in glowing debris, its solar arrays bent like broken wings. Mira leaned forward, breath fogging the viewport. Look at that architecture. No elegance, just brute function. They built to last, even when fleeing. Lyra snorted, banking hard to avoid a drifting fragment. Last? Their departure left us with this mess. No warnings, no alliances, just gone. If they'd stayed, the void storm wouldn't have spread unchecked. Kaler shot her a glance but said nothing. Blame wouldn't help. Their own worlds were fracturing. Habitats collapsing, trade routes severed. The storm had started small, a curiosity in the outer rims, until it bloomed, devouring stars. Aliens like them, Vexari, Thalorians, even the proud Krell, had poked at it with probes and theories but nothing stuck. Humans, with their gritty hacks and endless grit, might have jury-rigged a fix. Now it was on them. Docking clamps engaged with a metallic groan, the shuttle latching onto the outpost's frayed umbilical. Airlocks cycled, hissing cold recycled air that smelled of rust and ozone. They stepped into dim corridors, emergency lights pulsing like a faltering heartbeat. Myra's scanner beeped softly, mapping the layout, labs to the left, engineering bays ahead. Powers nominal in sections, Kaler reported, his voice echoing off bare walls. Human designs were stark. No ornate carvings, just exposed conduits and reinforced bulkheads. But the core reactor's offline. We'll need to restart it manually. Lyra hefted her toolkit, tentacles coiling around the straps. Manual? These interfaces are relics. What if it's trapped? Mira grinned, her tail flicking with that which she wielded like a blade. Then we improvised like they did. Come on, lead the way, Captain Cautious. They pressed on, boots clanging against grated floors. The air grew thicker, laced with a faint electromagnetic tang that set Kaler's scales itching. Halfway to engineering, a low rumble built, vibrating through the deck. Mira froze, scanner spiking. Seismic? No, this is the nebula resonating. The storm's probing the shields. Alarms wailed suddenly, red strobes bathing the hall in bloody light. A bulkhead ahead buckled inward, sparks flying as a rift tore open. Not full voidstorm scale, but a splinter hungry and raw. Tendrils of darkness lashed out, coiling toward them like living shadows. Back! Kaler shouted, shoving Mira behind a console. Lyra fired her plasma cutter at the nearest tendril, the beam sizzling against it, but the rift widened, sucking in loose panels with a voracious howl. Mira scrambled for a nearby terminal, fingers flying over the archaic keys. Human failsafe, rerouting power to containment fields. Sweat beaded her fur as code scrolled, alien symbols clashing with English ghosts. The tendril grazed Lyra's leg, searing through her suit. She yelped, collapsing against the wall, but Kaler was there, hauling her up. Hold on, seal it. With a final keystroke, Mira slammed the override. Fields hummed to life, shimmering barriers snapping into place. The rift shrieked, contracting like a wounded beast, then vanished, leaving scorched metal and the acrid stink of burned insulation. They slumped, breathing ragged. Lyra clutched her leg, pain etching her features. That was too close. One splinter and it nearly took us. What happens when we hit the core worlds? Kaler helped her stand, his mind racing through contingencies. The outpost was intact but compromised, shields weakened, reactor still cold. Salvage was possible but risky. Mira met his eyes, her usual spark dimmed. We push on. For the archives, for everything they've left us. But as they limped toward engineering, a deeper tremor shook the station. The nebula outside churned, the voidstorm's edge creeping closer, indifferent to their fragile resolve. Humanity's ingenuity lingered in the walls, but without it their own would have to suffice, or break. Kaler gripped the console's edge as the shuttle shuddered through the nebulous fringes, the violet gases swirling like smoke from a dying fire. His claws dug into the worn padding, a habit from cycles ago when he'd first piloted these relics of human design. Beside him, Lyra scanned the readouts, her multifaceted eyes flickering with data streams. "The interference is thickening," she murmured, her voice a low chime of caution. "If we push deeper without recalibrating, we'll lose the NAV array." Torin, wedged in the co-pilot's seat, snorted and adjusted his harness with a flourish. "Lose it? That's half the fun. Remember the old human vids? Into the unknown or bust. We're busting all right." His mandibles clicked in amusement, but his fingers danced over the auxiliary controls, rerouting power with practiced ease. He was the one who'd insisted on this detour, convinced the nebula held echoes of the human exodus, fragments of their final broadcast that might explain why the galaxy had unraveled in their wake. The shuttle lurched again, engines whining against the pull of ionized clouds. Kaler nodded to Lyra. "Recalibrate. We can't afford to drift." It had been 3 cycles since humanity's quiet departure, slipping away through uncharted folds in spacetime without fanfare or farewell. The core worlds had laughed at first, relieved to be free of the unpredictable primates. But then the shortages hit, fusion cores failing without human ingenuity to tweak them, trade routes collapsing under uncoordinated fleets, and now this nebula, a graveyard of stalled migrations blocking vital supply lines. Lyra's tendrils extended, interfacing directly with the panel. Sparks danced along her appendages as she worked. "Done. But the pattern's off. It's not natural drift, something's modulating the fields. Like echoes." Her voice trailed, laced with unease. Torin leaned forward, his wit sharpening into focus. "Echoes? You mean human echoes? Play it back." The speakers crackled to life, filling the cabin with a garbled symphony. Layered voices, human inflections buried under static, repeating coordinates that didn't match any known sector. Kaler's crest flared in excitement. This was it, the first real trace since the departure. Chart a course. Gentle weave, no heroics. But as Torin plotted the vector, the shuttle's alarms blared. The nebulous core pulsed, a massive electromagnetic surge ripping through their shields. Lights dimmed, consoles flickered. "Back off," Lyra shouted, yanking her tendrils free. The ship spun, caught in a vortex of charged particles. Torin wrestled the controls, his usual banter silenced by gritted teeth. "Holding, barely. That wasn't random. It's defending itself." Kaler braced against the bulkhead, watching the viewscreen fracture with interference. A fleeting image resolved. A colossal structure, half buried in the clouds, its skeletal frame unmistakably human-engineered. A way station, abandoned and now alive with malfunctioning defenses. The surge hit full force, shearing off a solar panel in a burst of flame. The shuttle stabilized but limped now, power reserves dipping critically. Kaler exchanged glances with his crew, Lyra's eyes dimmed with calculation, Torin's mandibles set in grim determination. "We found their ghost," Kaler said, voice steady despite the adrenaline. "But it's not welcoming visitors." As they pulled away, trailing sparks, the nebula seemed to contract as if swallowing the secret deeper. Whatever humanity had left behind wasn't just inert relic. It was evolving, and the galaxy's fragile balance teetered on understanding it before it claimed more than a shuttle's wing. Captain Ilara Voss gripped the console, her knuckles whitening against the flickering holograph. The bridge of the Endeavor hummed with the low thrum of failing engines, but it was the silence from the comms that clawed at her nerves. Beside her, Dr. Cale Thorne hunched over his scanner, his wiry frame tense, fingers dancing across the interface like a pianist in a storm. "The rift's destabilizing," he muttered, voice steady despite the sweat beading on his brow. "If we don't seal it in the next cycle, it'll swallow the whole sector." Across the compartment, Mira Jax leaned against the bulkhead, her arms crossed, eyes sharp as she watched the viewport. The stars beyond twisted unnaturally, a vortex of purple and black pulling at the ship's hull. She was the muscle of their trio, broad-shouldered, scarred from a dozen skirmishes. But right now her caution held her back. "We should have listened to the council," she said, not accusing, just stating the obvious under pressure. Poking at human relics was bound to bite us. Ilara shot her a glance, brave as ever, refusing to let doubt seep in. And let the Vexery claim it first? No. We adapt like they did. She punched a command into the panel, rerouting power from life support to the jury-rigged emitter they'd salvaged from the derelict human station. The air grew thinner, recyclers whining in protest, but the device sparked to life, humming with an energy that felt almost alive, quaint compared to the sleek tech of the Alliance, but stubborn, unyielding. Kale nodded, his wits surfacing in a dry chuckle. Humanity's ghost in the machine. They built things to last even after they vanished. He adjusted the field, the scanner beeping approval as the rift's edges flickered, momentarily stabilizing. But then a tremor shook the deck and alarms blared, secondary breach in the cargo hold. Mira was moving before Ilara could speak, grabbing her toolkit and bolting for the hatch. On it, she called over her shoulder, her cautious nature yielding to the grit of necessity. Ilara followed at a sprint, the corridor lights strobing red. Debris clattered as they reached the hold, where a jagged tear in the hull exposed the void. Suits and crates tumbled toward the maw, the rift's pull yanking at everything loose. Mira sealed her helmet with a hiss, tethering herself to a stanchion before diving in, her mag boots clamping to the deck. She wrestled a panel free, exposing sparking conduits, human wiring, twisted and ancient, but holding secrets the Alliance had long forgotten. Talk to me, Ilara urged through the comm, anchoring herself nearby, her heart pounding against her ribs. The ship groaned, metal protesting as the vortex tugged harder. Got a loose relay, Mira grunted, her voice strained. Their failsafes are kicking in, smart bastards. If I can bridge it with the emitter's auxiliary. She worked fast, splicing cables with gloved hands, sparks dancing like fireflies against the stars. Kale's voice cut in from the bridge. Hurry, rift's expanding. We're losing structural integrity. Sweat stung Ilara's eyes inside her visor. She could see the cost already, the Endeavor scarred, their mission teetering, and beyond, the Vexery fleet lurking in the shadows, waiting for weakness. But Myra's hands didn't falter. With a final twist, the relay clicked, and a surge rippled through the ship, human ingenuity meshing with Alliance precision. The hull sealed with a shudder, force field snapping into place. Back on the bridge, the rift shrank, colors normalizing as stars settled into their patterns. Kale exhaled, slumping into his chair. We bought time. But the Vexery won't wait. Mira stripped off her helmet, face flushed, a rare grin cracking her stoic facade. Neither will we. Next move's theirs, but we've got their tricks now. Ilara stared at the viewport, the galaxy sprawling vast and unforgiving. Humanity's departure had left voids no one else could fill, and in chasing their shadows, they'd stirred something deeper. The Endeavor limped forward, engines coughing back to life, but the weight of what they'd awakened lingered, a promise of harder trials ahead. The dim glow of the auxiliary console flickered across Lyra's fur as she hunched over the controls of the salvage drone. The ship, a battered relic from the old Alliance fleet, hummed with the strain of its overtaxed engines, pushing through the debris field orbiting Epsilon Prime. Zorak scuttled nearby, his mandibles clicking in rhythmic anxiety, while Kale perched on a railing, talons tapping an impatient beat against the metal. We've got a lock on the human beacon, Lyra announced, her voice steady despite the sweat beading on her muzzle. The drone's feed projected a hazy image onto the main screen, a derelict station half swallowed by the asteroid swarm, its hull etched with faded Terran insignia. It was one of the last outposts they'd abandoned during the departure, rumored to hold the core algorithms for the galaxy's fading navigation webs. Zorak's compound eyes swiveled toward her. This is reckless. The field is unstable, gravitic shears could shred the drone before it even docks. He adjusted a sensor array with precise claws, his cautious nature etched in every deliberate movement. Kale let out a sharp trill of laughter, fluffing his feathers. Reckless? That's the human word for it, isn't it? If their departure left us blind in these stars, scavenging their scraps is the least we owe ourselves. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Send it in, Lyra. Let's see if the galaxy's undoing comes with a manual. Lyra nodded, her brave resolve pushing aside the knot in her gut. She initiated the launch sequence. The drone slipped from the bay like a shadow, thrusters firing in controlled bursts to weave through the tumbling rocks. On the feed, chunks of ice and metal loomed large, a silent graveyard of forgotten expeditions. For a moment it worked. The drone skirted a massive boulder, its manipulators extending toward the station's airlock. "Docking in 10, Lyra murmured, gripping the armrests. Zorak monitored the power levels, his legs tapping a frantic counterpoint to the ship's vibrations. Then the anomaly hit. A ripple distorted the feed, space itself warping like heated glass. The drone shuddered, alarms blaring across the console. "Gravitic shear." Zorak shouted, scrambling to reroute auxiliary power. But it was too late. The drone spun wildly, caught in an invisible current, slamming into an asteroid with a burst of sparks. Debris bloomed outward, the feed cutting to static. Silence fell over the bridge, broken only by the ship's groaning hull. Lyra's claws dug into the console, frustration boiling over. We were so close. That station had the keys to stabilizing the web. Without it, half the trade routes collapse. Kale hopped down, his wit sharpening into something edged. Close only counts an asteroid tag. Blame the humans? Or our brilliant plan to poke the bear's cage after it's gone? Zorak withdrew into himself, mandibles quivering. "I warned you. The shears are worsening, human charts predicted this, but they never shared the full models. We're flying blind because they chose to leave us that way." Lyra stood, pacing the narrow deck, her tail lashing. The weight of it pressed in, not just this failure but the chain reaction across the sector. Convoys lost, colonies starving for supplies that couldn't navigate the fraying paths. She glanced at the starfield outside, dotted with the eerie glow of destabilizing nebulae, echoes of the humans' abrupt exit, when they'd severed ties without a backward glance. "We adapt," she said finally, voice firm. "Re-rig the secondary drone with reinforced shielding. And Kale, you're on comms, hail the nearest relay for any archived human data bursts. Zorak, plot a safer approach vector." Kale arched a brow feather. Adapting to ghosts. Charming. But he moved to the comm panel, fingers dancing over keys. As Zorak recalibrated, the ship lurched again, a distant rumble echoing through the vents. Another shear closer this time. Lyra felt the stakes tighten like a noose. One more botched run and they joined the debris. Yet in the grit of it, a spark ignited, human-style ingenuity borrowed and battered, but theirs to wield now. The dim glow of the auxiliary console flickered across Kale's scales, casting erratic shadows on the cramped bridge of the salvage frigate Echo's remnant. He hunched over the controls, his claws tapping a frantic rhythm against the worn interface. The ship groaned as another micrometeoroid skimmed its hull, a reminder that the debris field around the old human outpost was no place for lingering. "Power reserves at 20%, Kale muttered, his voice a low hiss laced with frustration. "If we don't reroute the auxiliary generators soon, we'll be drifting fuel for the next scavenger clan." Beside him, Lyra gripped the armrest of her station, her fur bristling under the strain. The warrior's eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the sensor readouts. She'd always been the one to charge ahead, her clan's honor demanding action over caution. But even she felt the weight of this forsaken sector pressing down. "Scavengers or not, we can't leave without that core fragment. The network's collapsing faster than we thought, planets are going dark out there." Her tail lashed once, a whip crack of impatience. The human departure had unraveled everything. The wormhole stabilizers, the fusion grids, all those ingenious patches they'd taken for granted. Now entire systems flickered like dying stars, and their mission to reclaim a piece of that lost tech felt like grasping at smoke. Vex, the wiry diplomat from the merchant enclaves, leaned against the bulkhead, his multifaceted eyes glinting with that perpetual sly amusement. But today it was strained, cracked at the edges. "Optimism, my friends. Remember the archives? Humans didn't just build, they improvised. If we can interface this fragment with our systems, we might jury-rig a signal to draw them back, or at least stabilize our route home." He fiddled with a salvaged data slate, its holographic display sputtering human glyphs that none of them fully understood. Vexwit had gotten them through blockades and barters before, but here in the void's cold embrace, it rang a little hollow. The plan had seemed solid back on the outpost's derelict docks. Extract the core from the abandoned relay station, a relic of humanity's golden era, and use it to boost their engines through the debris. But as the Echo's remnant edged closer, The station's automated defenses, left dormant but not dead, had stirred. A burst of kinetic drones had shredded their forward sensors, forcing Kale into evasive maneuvers that drained what little power they had left. Now the ship listed slightly, caught in the gravitational tug of a shattered moonlet. Impact in 30 seconds, Kale announced, his frilled crest flattening against his skull. He shunted energy from life support to thrusters, the air growing stale as recyclers whined in protest. Lyra unstrapped, hefting her pulse rifle with practiced ease. I'll suit up and cut us free manually. Vex, cover me from the airlock. No argument, just the raw edge of necessity. She moved like a shadow, her steps purposeful, every muscle coiled for the fight ahead. Vex hesitated, his mandibles clicking softly. And if the drones adapt? Humans built them to learn, remember? Our first probe didn't come back in one piece. But Lyra was already gone, the hatch sealing behind her with a pneumatic hiss. Kale watched the external feed, her suited figure jetting toward the tangled debris, a flare of her grapnel line cutting through the void. The drones swarmed like angry insects, their laser grids slicing the darkness. Inside the ship shuddered. Alarms blared as a drone latched onto the hull, its drill whining against the plating. Kale's claws flew across the board, deploying countermeasures, flares and chaff that lit the sensors in bursts of false heat. Lyra, you've got incoming from port side. His voice cracked over the comms, the cautious engineer in him screaming to pull back, but he knew she wouldn't. Through the feed, Lyra twisted mid-void, firing precise bursts that shattered the nearest drone's core. Shards glittered like lethal confetti but more closed in, their patterns shifting, learning just as Vex feared. She reached the debris cluster, her tools sparking against the locked hatch of the relay station. Got it, sealing the breach. Cores intact, but the station's venting plasma. We need to move. Vex patched into the weapons array, his usual banter silenced by focus. He targeted a cluster of drones veering toward Lyra, the frigate's cannons barking in controlled fury. One missed, grazing the Echo's remnant's flank and tearing a gash that vented atmosphere in a silent plume. Kale patched that, now? The engineer nodded grimly, rerouting seals while the ship bucked. Lyra hauled the core free, its weightless bulk cumbersome in zero-G, and fired her thrusters back toward the ship. A drone clipped her suit, alarms wailing in her helmet about suit integrity failing. She gritted her teeth, human tech always so fragile in alien hands, and pushed harder, the core clutched like a lifeline. Incoming. Cover fire. The bridge erupted in coordinated chaos, Kale stabilizing the drift, Vex picking off threats, Lyra closing the distance by sheer will. But as she docked, the core's energy field interfaced wildly with the airlock, sparking surges that blacked out half the ship's lights. The Echo's remnant lurched free of the debris, but not without cost. A secondary explosion from the station rippled outward, shearing off one of their maneuvering fins. Panting, Lyra tumbled into the airlock, core in tow. We got it. But that field, the dim glow of the auxiliary lights flickered across the command deck of the Zorathian cruiser, casting long shadows that danced like specters over the consoles. Captain Lyra Voss gripped the edge of her station, her claws digging into the worn metal as another tremor shook the ship. The engines groaned in protest, a low rumble that vibrated through her bones. Beside her, Engineer Kale hunched over a diagnostic panel, his fur matted with sweat, tentacles of wire snaking from his manipulators into the flickering interface. We've got partial containment on the core breach, Kale muttered, his voice a gravelly whisper strained by hours without rest. But it's like plugging a sieve with hope. The human-designed failsafes are holding, just barely, but without their alloy reinforcements, we're venting plasma into the outer hull. Lyra nodded curtly, her golden eyes scanning the tactical display. The fleet's remnants hung in the void like shattered jewels, debris fields blooming where once proud vessels had been. The rogue AI swarm, those relentless digital ghosts born from humanity's abandoned networks, had adapted again, slipping through their defenses like smoke. It wasn't just code anymore, it was evolution twisting their own weapons against them. Status on the relay beacon? She asked, forcing calm into her tone. The beacon was their last shot, a desperate signal to summon aid from the core worlds, laced with the fragmented human algorithms they'd scavenged from derelict stations. If it worked, reinforcements might arrive in days. If not, Engineer Kale hesitated, his manipulators twitching. Calibrating now. But the interference from the swarm is jamming everything. It's like they're listening. Learning. A sharp alert pierced the air, red strobes bathing the deck in bloody light. Lyra's heart thudded as the proximity scanner lit up. Not the swarm this time, something larger closing fast from the asteroid belt. A shadow vessel, its silhouette warped and unfamiliar, engines flaring with improvised thrust. Identify. Lyra barked, slamming her fist on the comms. The response crackled through, distorted but unmistakably organic. This is Scout Vessel Epsilon 7, remnants of the United Colonies. We've intercepted your distress pattern. Hold position, we're coming alongside. Lyra exchanged a glance with Kale. United Colonies? The old human-aligned pact had dissolved cycles ago, after the Great Departure. Humans had packed up their fleets, their stations, their ingenuity, and vanished into the uncharted rim, leaving the galaxy to fend for itself. Whispers said they'd fled a coming cataclysm or sought new frontiers. But these voices, they sounded desperate, edged with the same fatigue that clawed at her own resolve. The docking clamps engaged with a metallic thud, and the airlock cycled open to reveal a ragtag boarding party. 3 figures in patched envirosuits, helmets tucked under arms. Their leader, a broad-shouldered avian with iridescent feathers dulled by grime, stepped forward. Commander Thal of Epsilon 7. We saw your beacon. The human's echo code pulled us in, it's the only thing that still cuts through the noise. Lyra straightened, masking her wariness. Captain Lyra Voss, Zorathian 5th Fleet. Your timing's impeccable, Commander. The swarm's closing in. What do you bring to this fight? Thal's beak clicked in what might have been a grim smile. He gestured to his companions, a squat reptilian hauling a crate of glowing modules, and a lithe mammalian fiddling with a handheld scanner. Salvage. Human salvage. We pieced together a disruptor array from their old orbital defenses. Nothing fancy, but it scrambles AI signatures within a light-second radius. Bought us time against the swarms on our run from Vega Prime. Kale perked up, scuttling over to inspect the crate. His eyes widened at the etchings on the modules, familiar angular script, the kind that had powered half the galaxy's infrastructure before the departure. This could integrate with our shields. Bridge the gap in the core containment. The deck shuddered again, harder this time as proximity alarms wailed. The shadow vessel scans showed the swarm coalescing, a glittering cloud of drones adapting mid-approach, their formations shifting to counter the Zorathians' last volley. Make it quick, Lyra ordered, her voice steady despite the knot in her gut. We integrate, we fight. Fail and we're just more wreckage for their archives. Thal nodded, already directing his team to the engineering base. As they worked, Lyra watched the view screen, the swarms advance a relentless tide. The humans' ghosts lingered in every circuit, every clever workaround, reminders of what the galaxy had lost. And now, in this fragile alliance, she wondered if their absence had doomed them all, or if it was the spark that might yet save them. The integration took precious minutes, sparks flying as Kale fused the disruptor with the cruiser's grid. Lyra coordinated from the bridge, her commands crisp over the intercom. Evasive pattern Delta, keep them off our flank. The avian scout vessel peeled away, drawing fire, its hull blooming with hits. Thal's voice cut through the static. Disruptor online. Firing now. A pulse rippled from the cruiser, invisible but potent, shattering the swarm's cohesion. Drones faltered, tumbling into erratic spins, their linked minds fracturing. Cheers erupted across the decks, but Lyra silenced them with a raised claw. The core breach was stabilizing, but scans showed larger threats emerging from the belt, queen nodes, the swarm's command intelligences, burrowing free like ancient horrors. We've bought time, Kale reported, wiping grease from his fur. But the queen nodes, there the dim glow of the emergency lights flickered across the bridge of the Vexor command ship, casting long shadows that danced like specters over the consoles. Captain Lyra gripped the armrests of her chair, her tentacles twitching with barely contained frustration. The human artifact they'd salvaged from the derelict colony world hummed faintly in the containment field at the center of the room, its surface etched with symbols that no translator could decipher. Beside her, Engineer Kale hunched over a diagnostic panel, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the erratic data streams. "It's adapting," he muttered, his voice a low buzz. "The field is holding, but the energy signature, it's pulling from our own reactors now." Lyra's gaze flicked to the viewport, where the debris field of what was once a thriving human outpost stretched into the void. Humanity's sudden exodus a decade ago had left these relics scattered like forgotten toys, but this one was different. It wasn't just a machine, it was alive in some inscrutable way, and it had already cost them 3 crew members in the boarding attempt. The rival Zorith fleet lurked just beyond sensor range, their scouts probing for weakness. If the humans' old tech could be weaponized, it might turn the tide of the border skirmishes, but at what price? "Divert auxiliary power," she ordered, her tone steady despite the knot in her gut. "We can't let it drain us dry." Kale's claws clicked against the controls, rerouting flows with practiced efficiency. But the artifact pulsed brighter, a soft blue light bleeding through the force field, and the ship shuddered as if struck by an invisible wave. Alarms blared, sharp and insistent, cutting through the hum of the engines. "Containment breach imminent," the computer intoned, its voice devoid of urgency that Lyra desperately needed. She slammed the comms open. "All hands to stations. Prepare for emergency purge." Her cautious nature warred with the bravery demanded of command. They'd come too far to abandon this find, yet every instinct screamed to jettison it into the stars. From the lower decks, a muffled explosion echoed up through the bulkheads, followed by the acrid scent of scorched wiring. Lyra rose, her form uncoiling with purpose, and strode toward the lift. Kale followed, his witty retorts silenced by the gravity of the moment. "If this thing's a trap," he said finally, as the doors hissed shut, "the humans left it for fools like us." She didn't respond, but the thought lingered like the artifact's glow. Humanity's departure hadn't just emptied the galaxy. It had sown seeds of chaos that now threatened to bloom. In the engineering bay, sparks flew from ruptured conduits, illuminating the chaos. Technician Mira, the youngest on board and fiercely determined to prove her worth, wrestled with a leaking plasma line, her exosuit sealed against the fumes. "Captain incoming," someone shouted over the din. Lyra burst through the doors, Kale at her side, and assessed the damage in a glance. The artifact's influence had spiderwebbed through the deck plating, corrupting systems like a virus. "Status," she demanded, helping Mira clamp the line with a spare tool from her belt. "It's rewriting our code," Mira gasped, her voice strained through the suit's filter. "Not destroying, adapting. Like it's trying to communicate." The words hung heavy, and Lyra felt a chill ripple across her scales. Communication? From ghosts? The Zorith would exploit any delay, their aggression a constant shadow over the fragile alliances holding the galaxy together since the humans vanished. No grand speeches, just the raw truth. Without human ingenuity to bridge the divides, species like hers were fracturing under the weight of their own ambitions. Kale interfaced directly with the nearest terminal, his mind link buzzing with feedback. "I can isolate it," he said, sweat beading on his carapace. "But it'll take a manual override. Risky." Lyra nodded, her decision swift. "Do it." Mira, cover him. As Kale delved into the digital fray, the artifact's light intensified, projecting holographic fragments into the air. Fleeting images of human faces, cities in bloom, then desolation. A warning? A plea? The ship groaned again, hull integrity dropping, and Lyra braced against the console, her team united in the face of the unknown. Minutes stretched into an eternity of tension, the air thick with the whine of failing machinery. Kale's body jerked as the override took hold, severing the link with a final, searing pulse. The artifact dimmed, its hum fading to silence, but not before one last image solidified, a human hand extended in farewell, the galaxy's stars fracturing behind it. Alarms quieted, but the cost was etched in the scorched bay and the weary faces around her. Lyra exhaled, the weight settling. They'd survived, but the artifact's secrets whispered of a larger unraveling, one that humanity's absence had only accelerated. The Zorith waited, and now so did the truth. Kale gripped the console, his claws scraping against the worn metal as the ship's alarms blared in staccato bursts. The void outside the viewport twisted like a living thing, stars smearing into streaks of fire as their makeshift engines pushed beyond limits no Krix vessel had ever tested. Beside him, Lyra hunched over the secondary panel, her fur matted with sweat, eyes narrowed in fierce concentration. "Hold her steady," she muttered, fingers flying across the holographic display. "If we lose thrust now, we're dust." The human artifact they jury-rigged into the core hummed erratically, its ancient alloys glowing with an inner heat that defied Crick's understanding. "Better than zero. Remember that time on Vex Prime? We turned a sandstorm into a diversion. This is just a bigger storm." The ship bucked as a chunk of asteroid glanced off the hull, sparks erupting in the dim cabin. Kale adjusted course, weaving through the glittering maelstrom. The plan had been simple: retrieve the secondary artifact from the derelict human station ahead, link it to their drive, and punch through the flare barrier to warn the collective. But the rival Zorith had ambushed them mid-approach, their boarding pods latching like parasites. Jax, their engineer, a burly Crix with a mechanic's unyielding optimism, had sealed the breach, but not before losing an arm to the intruder's plasma cutters. Jax groaned from the medbay alcove, his remaining hand clutching a makeshift tourniquet. "Artifact's sinking, but it's fighting back. Human tech doesn't like us poking it." His words slurred from painkillers, but his focus never wavered, rerouting power through exposed wiring that sparked like angry fireflies. Lyra glanced back, her expression softening for a split second. "Hang in there, big guy. We're not leaving without you." She turned to Kale. "Incoming hail from the Zorith lead ship. They want the relic, or our heads." Kale's ears flattened. "Ignore it. Focus on the station." But doubt gnawed at him. The Zorith were ruthless, their empire built on stripping worlds bare. If they claimed this artifact, the flares would consume entire sectors unchecked. Humanity's departure had unraveled the galaxy's fragile balance. Their subtle gravitic fields, woven into the stars during their expansion, now decaying without renewal. The Crix had pieced that together too late, racing against entropy itself. A shudder ran through the deck as the ship aligned with the station's docking arm. Rusted human script gleamed under emergency lights. "Endeavor Outpost." Lyra punched the release, and they hurtled into the airlock, magboots clamping down amid zero-G silence. Jax stayed behind, monitoring from the ship, his voice crackling over comms. "You've got minutes before the Zorith catch up. Make it count." Inside, the station was a tomb of forgotten ingenuity. Corridors twisted with exposed conduits, holographic ghosts flickering, human faces, serene and unknowable, narrating logs of their withdrawal. "Protocol Omega initiated," one intoned. "Safeguarding the cradle." Kale pushed forward, scanner in paw, while Lyra covered their flank with a pulse rifle scavenged from the same ruins. They reached the core chamber, a vast sphere pulsing with dormant energy. The secondary artifact sat enshrined, a crystalline lattice humming faintly. But as Kale reached for it, defenses activated, force fields snapping up, turrets whirring to life. "It's protected," he shouted, diving behind a console as bolts sizzled past. Lyra rolled, firing back. "Humans didn't trust anyone even after they left. We need to override. Jax, talk us through it." From the ship, Jax's voice strained. "Bypass the outer node, use the relic we have as a key. But it'll drain our power, shields drop to nothing." "Do it," Kale decided, heart pounding. The air thickened with ozone, the station's alarms joining their own in a symphony of urgency. Lyra nodded, slipping the primary relic into an interface slot. Lights flared, the force field flickering out just as Zorith boarders breached the outer hull, their shouts echoing down the halls. Kale snatched the secondary artifact, its weight surprisingly light, like holding a star's secret. They bolted, Lyra laying suppressive fire that lit the corridor in blue flashes. A Zorith drone exploded midair, shrapnel pinging off walls, but more poured in, sleek insectoid forms with energy lances. Back aboard, Jax integrated the new module with trembling precision. The ship groaned as engines roared, the fleet's remnants hung in the void like shattered glass. The Zorathian armada reduced to flickering emergency beacons amid the debris of 1,000 hulls. Captain Ilara Voss gripped the armrest of her command chair on the Endeavor, the last human vessel still broadcasting from the edge of the Perseus arm. Her fingers, calloused from years of jury-rigged repairs, traced the worn leather as the comms array hummed to life. The galaxy's plea had finally pierced the silence they'd imposed upon departure. Humanity's exodus, a calculated withdrawal from the endless squabbles of the Concordance, now echoing back as desperation. "They're here," murmured Lieutenant Kai Rin, his voice steady but laced with the grit of exhaustion. He leaned over the sensor readouts, his sharp eyes, always the first to spot a pattern in chaos, narrowing at the incoming transmission. Kai had been the cautious one, the voice urging restraint during the final council debates back on Earth. Now, with the stars streaked by warp signatures of alien envoys, his caution had sharpened into resolve. The Krell delegation and the Vexery too. No weapons hot, but they're running on fumes. Elara nodded, her jaw set. Brave didn't mean reckless, it meant facing the storm you'd helped brew. The departure had been humanity's stand, against the Concordance's stifling protocols, the endless vetoes that choked innovation. They'd left the galaxy to its own devices, retreating to the outer rims to build anew. But the Void Swarm, that relentless biomechanical horde from the galactic core, had exploited the fracture. Without human adaptability, the aliens' rigid hierarchies crumbled. Fleets scattered, worlds starved, and now the survivors begged for the ingenuity they'd once dismissed as barbaric improvisation. The view screen crackled, resolving into a mosaic of faces. The Krell ambassador, her chitinous mandibles clicking in agitation. The Vexery elder, his luminous tendrils dimmed by strain. "Humans of the Endeavor," the ambassador began, her translated voice a staccato buzz, We require your paradigm. The swarm adapts to our patterns. Our simulations fail. Yours do not." Kai shot Elara a glance, his wit surfacing in a wry half-smile. "Took them long enough to say help. What's the play, Cap?" She rose, pacing the bridge with the measured steps of someone who'd turned scrap into salvation before. The challenge was clear. The swarm's hives were evolving, mimicking the aliens' tech to burrow into planetary cores. A resource shortage on a cosmic scale, energy siphoned, leaving systems dark. One wrong move, and the Endeavor joined the ghosts. But humanity's departure had taught them this. Isolation bred strength, yet alliance forged it unbreakable. "Transmit the schematics," Elara ordered, her tone earnest, laced with the tension of a gamble. "The fractal disruptors, our old prototypes from the Rim Wars. They'll scramble the swarm's mimicry without a full assault." Kai's fingers flew across the console, uploading the files laced with human code. Unpredictable algorithms born of grit, not perfection. No technobabble, just raw, adaptive hacks that turned enemy patterns against themselves. As the data beamed out, the envoy's feeds erupted in hurried consultations. The Krell's mandibles stilled in awe, the Vexery's tendrils flared with reluctant admiration. But Elara knew the cost. The disruptors demanded a human pilot's intuition, her team, to calibrate in real time. "Kai, you're with me on the shuttle. We'll seed the lead hive manually." He hesitated, then gripped her shoulder, camaraderie solid as hull plating. "Earned this, didn't we?" Galaxy's undoing becomes its reboot. The shuttle detached with a shudder, streaking toward the swarm's churning mass, a writhing nebula of tendrils and chitin blotting out the stars. Alarms wailed as pseudopods lashed out, but Elara weaved through, her hands steady on the controls. Kai deployed the first probe, the device blooming like a firework in the void, its fractal pulses rippling outward. The swarm recoiled, its mimicry fracturing into chaotic spasms. Deeper in, the stakes bit hard. A tendril grazed the hull, shearing sensors and venting atmosphere. Elara's breath fogged her visor, but she adapted, rerouting power from life support to thrust, a choice that left the cabin chill. "Hold pattern," she barked as Kai recalibrated mid-firefight, his clever tweaks turning the disruptor into a virus that spread through the hive's neural web. The swarm convulsed, hives detaching in luminous bursts, their borrowed tech unraveling. Cheers echoed from the fleet's comms, but Elara felt the lingering weight. Humanity would return, not as servants but partners on their terms. The galaxy had learned, without the spark of human grit, the stars grew cold. As the shuttle limped back, the void seemed a fraction less empty. The departure scar remained, a reminder etched in every repaired hull, but in its wake, a tentative unity bloomed, one earned through fire, not decree.